So, first of all, welcome everybody. Welcome to those that are new to the group. It's really, really good to have you here. Thank you to the champions for inviting new people to the group.
Hi guys, it's an honour to be here and to be able to share my story today. I think the most appropriate place for me is to start from the very beginning, and my story starts with my birth and my early years, and how it kind of how I began. I was brought up in domestic violence, and that's kind of the beginning of my story. I'll share that my dad was violent towards my mum, and I was born early at home in my mum and dad's bedroom. I was obviously rushed to hospital because I was premature, but ultimately I was born straight into trauma, in domestic abuse. I don't think I ever felt like part of my family. I felt like my dad saw me as someone that was a bit mouthy, because I could always stand up for myself, and I don't think that doesn't fit in with an abuser, who's someone who wants to control. So right off the bat there, I was in trouble. And growing up in the 70s, being mixed, dual heritage, my dad's Caribbean and my mum's white British. There was no sense of identity. My mum didn't have a clue, how to take care of, my hair's quite European, but my brother and sister I'm the youngest of three, and brother and sister had afro hair, and they have quite coarse hair, and they had green eyes. And when I mentioned that I didn't feel like I fitted in, I looked very different to my siblings because my hair was straight when I was younger. And although I look just like my dad today, you couldn't see that when I was little. And so there was no bonding. Like, my dad didn't take to me. He actually used to call me. There was I'm going to mention this too. I mean, there was a lot of neglect, a lot of abuse. They used to joke, when you have jokes, family jokes, and you can have a laugh about it, but when you're younger, you think, well, me personally, I didn't think it was funny. And what I got called, I used to be told I was the local corner shop owner. His name was Karachi. Now, the family joke was that I belonged to Karachi, and because I looked so different, and my mum had lost the photo album of childhood pictures of me and my siblings. There was no pictures of, no birth pictures of me as well. So besides the fact that I believed that I wasn't part of the family, I was also told in jest that I was somebody else's. So all these things impacted on me, the not being accepted, as a baby, not being accepted for the way I looked, not being the same as my siblings. It just and made me feel like I keep saying, like I wasn't part of the family. And so I grew up feeling like I didn't belong. And I would go to school, I grew up I live in North London, and I was born in Hackney. So my first primary school was in Hackney. And I've lost what I was going to say.
What was the school, Donna? What was the school makeup like?
Right,
so in Hackney.
What I was going to say is, because of all these things that were going on at home, I started school quite young. I started school the year before I should have done, because I was, I don't know, I was in the same class as my sister. My sister's 11 months older than me. So we was in the same nursery class and the first year reception class. I could never settle in school, because I think, when I continue to talk, I'm gonna be mentioning all these labels that get put on you, and you get so many labels, and then before you know it, you're mummified with labels. And so when I was at primary school, I was told that I was disruptive and I couldn't settle. But nobody really back then was looking to see what was going on at home. You know, my dad was around sometimes, you know, my mum was around sometimes, you know, we were left on our own a lot of the time. And you know, like I said, there was a lot of abuse, and my dad used to target me. You know, we'd be gotten out of bed like in the early hours of the morning, and you know, we would get a beating. You know, we'd have to line up and we'd get a beating. But anyway, this kind of started to shape the person that I was becoming. Very damaged, not knowing who I am, why I was here, what my place on this earth meant. So I've continued. We've left Hackney and I've moved to Islington now, and we're at another primary school, and I still can't settle. And you know, I'm going to school. You know, I was now put into a special class. But back then, in the 70s and 80s, if you didn't settle, if you were a little bit troublesome, you were put into a class called a special class, and that's where I was put. And I was also, because I was clever, they didn't really know, again, they didn't bother to see what was going on at home. I would often be given IQ tests by the head teacher, because I think maybe they thought that it was something maybe non-neurodevelopmental, because now we know what certain things are, like ADHD, autism. But back then, I think, because I was clever, they didn't know what was going on for me, and that I was basically acting out in trauma. So I was in class 9, and I wasn't doing very well, and then I got excluded from my first primary school, and then I went on to a second primary school, and at like 9, 10, I've now introduced myself to drugs, to abuse, to solvents. At 8 and 9, I started taking something called Tipex, and then, you know, 10, 11, gas. I was doing these things because I was so, I didn't know how to control all my feelings. And when I took substances, I was just taken out of myself for a little while, and it made me feel good. Like at such a young age, I have to say before then though, I found food. Food for me, food is something we all we need to survive. But I also used food as a tool for comfort, and I was called a comfort eater. So I was, you know, quite overweight. And in that time as well, I had something called child guidance, and it's now called CAMS, but when I was a child, it was called child guidance. And you know, my mum and dad weren't really interested, so they never used to take me. And of course, you're so guarded, like well, I was so guarded. If you was given, back then they gave you dollies and pens and paper, and their way of working out what was going on for you is they would read your play and you know, what you were doing. I mean, they still do that now, but back then, I think even at such a young age, I realized that I have to be guarded, because I can't tell. If I tell, I didn't know what would happen. Either I would get a beating from my dad, or I would be separated from my family. So yeah, I'm using substances, and there's like, you know, there's my dad. He's really abusive, really aggressive. He was also a bodybuilder, and he used to drive, I don't know if anyone knows what American Cadillacs are, right? So he'd be driving around in his big car, and he was really muscly, and you know, there was no love. And like I said before, he didn't bond with me, he didn't take to me. There was so much fear. And in my house, we would hear my dad's car pull up, because it was a big old American car, and you know, my blood would run cold. And you know, me and my siblings, we would just, like mice, we would just disappear. We would do whatever we could to get away from my dad, because he was so unpredictable, because he took steroids. He was a very angry, unpredictable man. I have to say, I was growing up to be an angry, unpredictable child, who couldn't maintain relationships, didn't know how to make friends, because these were the patterns these were the behaviors I was learning from my dad. And my mum, you know, she wasn't present, she wasn't able to comfort me. like I said, she wasn't able to show me any kind of like culture, because you know, neither did my dad, to be fair. My dad struggled with who he was as a person, as a Black person in the 70s in London. So around that time as well, I have to say, you know, where I didn't have no sense of identity, didn't like myself. I mainly didn't like the colour of my skin. Okay, I did not want to be mixed. And, you know, my dad would say to me, you know, you're black. And my mum would say, oh, you're mixed, you're half caste, was the word that I accepted, half caste. And that was another label, you know, to define who I was. And, you know, I hated my dad saying you're black. I'd be like, no, I'm not black, I'm black, because I didn't want to be black, like, because black was so negative back then, you know. So that was another reason to hate myself. So, you know, we've got all this going on at home, the violence, and you know, my dad being quite physical, and me in class 9. So I've turned up one day at school, big hand bruise on my face, and you know, an organisation called the NSPCC were called in to my school. I don't really remember anything about social services. I just remember the NSPCC being called in, and then looking over my brother and sister and myself, and looking at all of our you know, the physical abuse that we'd endured. There was no police. My dad didn't get any sort of, you know, there was no repercussions for my dad's behaviour. The NSPCC came to my house and they wanted to talk to my mum. And my mum was like, no, you can't come in, because she was scared of my dad and scared of what the possible outcome would be if she was to open up and tell the NSPCC about the level of violence that was going on in our house. You know, even the police back then weren't really willing to do anything, you know, and it was just everything was always sort of swept under the carpet, and everything, you know, you had to keep quiet. It's that secrets keep you sick, you know, you had to keep everything quiet. And, you know, at that time, my mum would leave my dad and we'd go to women's refuges, and my dad would hunt us down and we'd go home. And, you know, I'm not managing schools. I'm abusing substances now. You know, I'm having tutors. Eventually going back into school for my final year in primary school. There was so much racism. You know, my school, the school that I went to, was racist. And when I look back, I feel like they also helped to give me negative connotations on myself, you know, the educational side of it. I just, you know, the feeling of being failed by every you know, institution, my parents, like from the get-go, that word failed is very big for me. So, you know, I've also been sent to boarding school because I went to secondary school, got kicked out, you know, because no one's looking at what's going on at home. I'm still struggling. So I got sent to this boarding school. Didn't last long. You know, I got kicked out because of my behaviour. And at the same time, I went into care. My mum had finally decided to leave my dad. And so I'm now in a children's home. I'm 12 now, and I'm still very angry. But I felt quite happy to be in care because I didn't have my dad, and I felt like I could do exactly what I liked, which I did do. You know, for years, you know, and then I've started smoking cannabis, and you know, I'm taking other drugs, and you know, I went home for a little while with my mum because she'd got a place and she wasn't able to care for me. So I'd gone back into care, and around 16, you know, I did end up going to a school which I absolutely loved. It was called a free school. It was an independent school, and it was like run by like hippies and stuff, and it was democratic, and you know, they would listen to you. You know, if you wanted something, we'd chair a meeting, we'd have a meeting, and you know, if we wanted it, we'd be heard. And that was something that I hadn't experienced either, was being heard. And so I've gone to this school. It was great. It was fantastic. One of the best experiences of my life. Except it was kind of run by hippies, so there was a lot of weed and drugs and stuff, but I was okay with that. And so now at 16, I'm living in this children's home, and I'm working in a market called Ridley Market, like selling hats, and so you've got all the church goers and stuff. And my dear old grandma, bless her, she passed many, many years ago. She was a Jehovah's Witness, so that was more conflicting stuff going on in my home. No religion, no sense of religion. And I also used to go to church. I used to go to a Catholic church, to a Church of England church, because I was seeking, because like I said before, I didn't know my purpose, didn't know why I was alive, because all I'd done was suffered. And I wanted to know what my purpose was. So yeah, I've got Granny. Granny's coming to the market, getting her church hats, and I'm in this children's home, I'm kind of doing what I like. And she said to me, she's going to take me to the Caribbean. And I'm like, whoa, like, you're taking me to the Caribbean? I didn't actually believe her, but she did. She ended up taking me to Trinidad, my dad's home country, at 16. And now that was a culture shock. It was nice because I could see, the other side, I could see where I'd come from. But, like I said, with my dad, who had struggles with who he was, so did my grandmother, because she was 3/4 black through slavery. So she hung on to that little piece of white that she had in her. And, it was just so messy. It was messed up. Like, I could never, just everything, nothing ever made sense. I think, okay, my nan's black, I can hang on to this. But no, she didn't want to be black either. Like, it was just very confusing. So at 16, I enjoyed this time in the Caribbean, and then I left care. I went back to live with my mum at 16, and now I think I'm a big woman, and I'm getting into club drugs. Met my first boyfriend, taking drugs, and continuing to just survive, because I wasn't living, I was surviving, having jobs here and there which I couldn't maintain. I also did a course, performing arts. I thought I was going to be a famous actress at one point. I was convinced like that was my calling. I couldn't focus on anything. I did fashion design. I just couldn't focus, because I didn't have nurturing parents that believed in me, that told me, you've got this, you can do this, you can do whatever you want, because you're special. I wasn't told any of these things. I was always told negative things, these labels. So I didn't have the confidence, and I didn't have the courage to pursue, my life choices, my career choices. So, I'm just going through life having really bad relationships with, men, because I don't know how to accept kind, loving relationships, because I don't know what they are. I don't know how to maintain friendships with women either, because I didn't have any positive, anything positive to go by, because my dad was so violent. I believed that if I was violent, like, if I could, my friends would fear me and be friends with me. Obviously that's absurd. And today I know that, you can't rule with fear. It just doesn't work. So I didn't really have any friendships either. So I was very, very, very lonely, very, very angry, and still very confused for so many years. And eventually my drugs turned, it got quite serious, and I started taking quite heavy drugs. I became quite a serious cokehead. I took lots of cocaine for years, and that's another story, the situations I would get myself into on cocaine. And then I met this guy that was just like my dad. He was a bodybuilder who'd been released from prison, and he took steroids. I think I was quite excited by him. And, they say, you always end up with, or you look for someone that is like your, I went for someone that was like my dad. Like, I didn't do it intentionally, it just happened. And he was quite violent to me. And I kind of accepted it, because that was my norm. And he introduced me to heroin, and to come down off cocaine. I started taking heroin, and if I'm honest, I kind of felt like I'd arrived, you know, I was now a drug addict, and I was very comfortable with being a drug addict. That was my next label, that, you know, the next hat that I was going to wear for a few more years. I could just totally be numb. And around that time, I had before I took the heroin, I had a breakdown, and I ended up in intensive care because I think it had all got too much for me before I got onto the heroin. I'm like, you know, like every few years it would come to me like, why am I here? What's going on? And then the deep despair and sadness would just take over, and I would just be like, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to live. And so, you know, I tried to take my life, and I ended up in intensive care, and I'd been sent to a psychiatrist, and, you know, I had like one session with this psychiatrist, and then I met heroin. I thought, oh, heroin's much better, you know, I don't have to deal with my problems, I can just take drugs. And I have to say, at 11 as well, I also took, you know, an overdose, and nearly died. I took many overdoses in the space of about 10 years, because, like I've mentioned before, I didn't want to be here. I didn't understand why I was born to suffer. So I've got on heroin, managed to get into a relationship and have, you know, there's just so much, but I'm just going to outline bits. Met another guy, wasn't on drugs. I thought he could save me, and that I would become well if I had a child. And so at 29, you know, a lot happened before then. I'd left the country, didn't get in, gone to Australia, to be fair, and I had something called methadone with me, and they found it and they sent me back. And that same day they sent me back, met this guy, and I thought, okay, right, I can't travel, I'm gonna settle down and have a baby. And in my insane thinking, that was the right thing to do. So, and this guy happened to live on the same estate that I'd come from. So I thought, oh my God, like, you know, the planets were aligned, this is how it's meant to be, you know, we're meant to be. And so I've had this child, and, you know, I've had my son in addiction. Things didn't work out with his dad. And I continued to use drugs, managed to find myself in another relationship, which was very toxic, you know, very much another man, just like my dad, more domestic abuse. But this time, it was more like, you know, there's a film, I don't know what it's called, about this mixed race girl that gets murdered by her partner. And this guy, he was really nice to start with, and then within a very, very, very short space of time, besides the fact I got pregnant, like the same with my first son, I got pregnant within a month. With this man, my son was now not even 2, and I was pregnant with my daughter, who's now 16. He would tell me not to wear skirts, not to wear makeup. So the very person that I wasn't anymore. Like, it was like watching something. It was like watching a film. Like, I couldn't believe that my life had, you know, because I was such a fiery. I have to say, you know, I sound like, oh, I'm a victim, I've had a lot of domestic abuse. I was an abuser too. I was a very abusive, like, to the men that I was in relationships with. I was violent, I was physical, because, like I said before, I didn't know any better. So how are we doing for time? You're okay? Okay, right. So yeah, I've ended up with this bloody guy, and you know, and he's awful, and you know, he battered me a few times, and then I managed to get away from him, and I never pressed charges. But by the time I got away from him, I now had 2 children with him, and there's 11 months between them. He would follow me around, like my dad with my mum. I could never really get away from him. So I would have to up and move, like, you know, and take my children. And so with this second relationship, he was, you know, he would pick on my son, and it was it was awful for my boy, because my boy got exposed to so much. So we got exposed to my drug abuse, you know, my bad relationships, and now he's being picked on by his stepfather. So the most loving and caring thing I thought I could do for him, I have to say though, social services probably would have took him away from me anyway. I decided that it would be best if he lived with his dad, so he went to live with his dad. That was the biggest mistake I ever made. As far as that, I've made many mistakes, but with my son and his dad, that was a mistake I made there. We have recovered, but you know, you know, that sense of rejection, and you know, I understand, because I feel rejection, I feel abandonment, I feel, you know, all these things that I'm sure my son felt, I understood. So now he's gone to live with his dad. I've got 2 children. I'm moving about, still getting into bad relationships. I'm on drugs, you know, because I couldn't kick it. I'm playing cat and mouse with services. Sometimes I'm getting prescriptions. Sometimes I'm buying it off the street. Sometimes I'm freezing pee so they'd think that I'm clean. Because I never wanted to own my drug addiction, because I never wanted my children taken away from me. I thought that it would be best if I, in my madness, that they would be better off with me. But, you know, in reality, what they needed was a well mum, because what they had was a very, 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 very sick mum. And so we've moved about, and eventually, you know, I've allowed, I'm drinking, I've got sober. Right, let me start again. Right, so I've managed to get away from their dad. We had some time apart. I'm engaging in services because social services are involved, and they, you know, I'm on a script now. So I actually approached those social services that I need help. I'm in a domestic violence relationship, and they didn't really take much notice. But what I didn't realise is they were building up a case, and so I didn't know. And then eventually they got involved, and they're like, right, you need to get on a script, be part of the drug service. So I started taking methadone prescribed, and I kind of got cleanish, like I was still smoking cannabis and drinking alcohol, and I was separate. I wasn't supposed to have their dad around me, and I'd allowed him in my home one day, and I had, you know, and he battered me basically, and so then I had all like panic alarms put in, and you know, security gates and stuff, but the police didn't charge him. They wouldn't prosecute him, so he got away with that. And then I think a year later, this is like 2009 or something like that, 2008, 2009. Now 2010, you know, I had started, I'm drinking, like I said, drinking and smoking. I had relapsed back onto hard drugs, and I was like, you know, I wanted therapy, and I'd gone to social services to go, I need help. I want you to put me in a rehab with my children. I want to get clean, because I wanted to work on my trauma. I needed help. They were like, no, you're fine. You can just go to AA. And they paid for a babysitter. So after AA, I'd go and get drunk. And then eventually got back onto hard drugs. And I was scared. I didn't want to tell services because they were on a child protection register. And there was only a certain amount of time they could keep my children on this register before escalating it to court proceedings. So I had to own my addiction, and what I've tried to do is I've tried to get myself sectioned. So I've got really drunk, and I'm going to kill myself. My little kiddies, my babies were in their bedrooms. You know, they were quite aware of my drinking, and you know, every night I'd play music really loud, and you know, the bottles of wine. I never used to go out and leave them, but they were aware at 2, 3, 4 that mummy was very, very drunk. And on this particular night, I had called up all family members, and you know, I was telling them about themselves, and you know, but what I really wanted to do was get help. So I phoned my mum. I said, you know, I'm gonna die, and you know, she's called an ambulance. Ambulance has come. You know, I've said to my mum, you know, please take care of my babies, and she promised me she would. And that was the journey. That was the start of my new life. My children were placed with my mum. My oldest son was with his dad. But the thing about it, we all lived on the same estate. My mum was on that estate. My son and his dad were on that estate. We were all together. So we was, you know, it was always still close. As messy and as it was, we were there. I was still very present in my children's lives. So I've now got clean. I've gone to a detox, come off the methadone, and then gone to rehab. But before I was placed in rehab, I was the social worker had said that I needed to be part of something called FDAC, which is the Family Drug and Alcohol Court. It's specialised, because I'd been to family court previously and I'd relapsed. This was a specialised court for addicts that couldn't get clean, and that would say maybe continue to have children addiction, and you know, that had all these other problems like domestic abuse, growing up in trauma. So anyway, I've gone to FDAC. FDAC have placed me in a rehab. It was a community-based rehab. I thought I was going to the seaside. I thought I was going to go to one of those posh rehabs, and you know, it was just going to be great. Like, you know, these visions I had, like, no, you're going to be in London. You need to stay around your kids. You know, you can do this. So fighting addiction, watching your crack dealer walk past your house, right? In fact, you know what was hard for me was going home, coming out of a detox after 3 weeks, 4 weeks, going home to an empty house, a blue bedroom, a pink bedroom, my little kiddies' bedrooms empty, and the realization, the gravity of my situation hitting me, and it, you know, and knowing it could go either way. And for me, that in that moment, it's like, right, you know, you've got to get clean. So I've gone to rehab and stay clean. Gone to rehab, and what it done, it kind of took the lid off this can of worms of my trauma. So I did a little bit of therapy there, and then I went on to do 5 years of private therapy. And then, you know, I'm clean now. Like, I've been clean for nearly 11 years now. And thank you. And in that time, it's about recovery. Recovery for me, recovery for my children. I've actually now got 4 children. I had one in my early recovery. You know, just come up to 2 years clean. I gave birth to my 4th child, my 4th and very final child. And I believed that because I was clean, that, you know, this child would be, she was the one that was going to make everything better. I was very wrong, but that's another story. So the recovery with myself and my children, you know, this is ongoing. You know, because of the domestic abuse that I suffered as a child, and my daughter, when her dad battered me when I allowed him into my home, she witnessed it, and it had a very profound effect on her. And what she would do was, she would blame me. Everything was my fault. You know, what you're doing to my dad, you know, my dad didn't hit you, you're lying. He just, you know, and I used to find that so difficult. And, you know, she and I had a really tough relationship. So what I had to do very recently was address the impact of domestic abuse on my children. You know, my oldest son, like I said, he is another story. He doesn't live with me, he's 19, but I've got the domestic abuser, his 2 children live with me, you know, one's 16 and one's 15, and I had to find a way to help them understand, for one, understand addiction, and 2, understand domestic abuse in a way that they could digest and that would work for them, and that they could understand that it's not okay and there's ways out of certain lifestyles. So for my daughter, it was important that she found some, because when you grow up in domestic abuse, you have no self-worth, no self-esteem, and you just accept the bare minimum and think that it's okay. And I didn't want my daughter to have you know, negative feelings about herself. I didn't want her to be with a boy and tell her that she couldn't wear a skirt, or that, you know, I wanted her to feel strong and love herself. So we did a little training course, it was by the NSPCC, who I felt had failed me as a child. So it was very difficult to now embark on this course by the NSPCC. It's called the DART program, Domestic Abuse Recovering. I can't tell you the exact acronym, but I found it really, really, really helpful and useful for my daughter and I to recover through this, and for her to understand that it wasn't her fault, it wasn't my fault, and you know what red flags are, you know what to look out for, what's okay, what's not okay, and we got closer through this. It helped us to find a bit of a common ground, because I think she started to understand that it wasn't me, and that's what I just didn't want. That's what I found so painful, that she just blamed me. And now today, we're still in recovery. I'm doing family therapy with my daughter. We've been in CAMS. I've been in CAMS since my eldest son was about 4. I wasn't able to understand the process because of the drugs. I could never be present. I wasn't able to reflect, wasn't able to process. So, I was always in denial. I was always in avoidance. I couldn't, because I could only face my problems when the time was right. So when I was doing CAMS with him, I was always blaming him. His behavior, he was the bad one. He was this, he was that. I couldn't think about him as a child, because I didn't understand how to be a parent. So I just couldn't understand how he would feel. It's mad, really. And so I've had to learn how to be a parent, because my parents weren't parents. They didn't, I don't think they were happy being parents. I think my mum got pregnant with my brother when she was like 16. And she was in this domestic abuse relationship. She couldn't get out of it. And then she's had 3 kids, all close together, and she couldn't leave my dad. So she didn't know how to be a parent. My dad didn't know how to be a parent. So there was no foundation. So I've had to learn through services how to be loving and nurturing. Obviously the core of me, it was there, but I needed to know how to bring it out, because I just didn't know. And it's a process that still continues today. I'm learning how to empathize with my children, how to channel into their feelings, and to understand why they feel certain ways. And I have to try my hardest not to be controlling. Like, what I really want to do is control everything, but I have to allow my children to be beings, to be who they are, with boundaries. But they have a voice, and they need to be heard. That is so important. Even if you don't, if I don't agree with what they're saying, if I hear them, that's good for them. And so we're in CAMS now. There's my children, they have mental health issues, which I can recognise because I have awareness today, because of all the work that I've done. I don't dismiss them. I take them to CAMS. I engage, whereas my parents didn't. Working, so I've got all my own stuff, and then I have to be there for my children and work through their mental health. My daughter struggles with an eating disorder. My younger child, she has severe anxiety. My son, who lives with me, he's autistic. He only got diagnosed at 12. And I had to really fight the services, because they wanted to put everything on me. Your children are like this because of the way that you've been with them. I'm like, but no, there's something, there's actually something going on here. No, this is what you've done, and I really had to fight against them to get my son a diagnosis. But I'm very good at speaking up today, because I've learned to do it in a non-aggressive, I'm proactive. What's the word I'm looking for? I can articulate my feelings and my thoughts today, and make myself heard and my children heard, and that's important. I think I've kind of come to a natural end here. I think just to wrap it up, you know, the work for me is ongoing. It will never end. There's so much. You know, I heard someone speaking about knife crime. I could talk about that with my oldest son. He got involved in county lines. There's just so much. You know, I'm a parent. I don't like to say I'm a survivor. I'm a thriver. Okay, I thrive today, and I'm a positive person, and I have confidence today. I'm confident in my parenting that I can do this. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Yeah. Donna, I want to thank you for sharing your story. I think, I mean, I'm going to open up for everybody in the group here. I think the thing that struck me more than anything today was your honesty. That takes a lot. And I could see at points when you were talking that in lots of ways, you kind of went back to that space, yeah? And it's that realness and that openness that, you know, we really appreciate. Thank you so much.